I want to start today by talking about Epiphany. Epiphany. What it is. Epiphany, if you think about it in the church calendar, is a date. It's striking to me that in I think it's Orthodox tradition or Catholic tradition, it's on January 6th, which has come to mean something completely different in this country lately. But it's on January 6th, and it's supposedly the date that the wise men arrived and basically discovered not just that Jesus was what had compelled them, but that Jesus was the Son of God. And the word has come to be a word which largely is used as a religious word, and it really means the light dawning and the light breaking through. After you've been searching and searching and searching and not being able to figure it out. And then all of a sudden, something divine happens and the light shines through. Epiphany is not, so I'm going to make a distinction. Epiphany is something that happens when you've been searching and searching and searching and struggling, and then the light breaks through, right? If it's something that you weren't really searching for, that's called enlightenment. Right? Hey, I didn't know that before. You taught me something, now I'm enlightened. Right? And it's also got to be something that you're really searching for. You're really kind of grinding away at. The kind of Western world, we always use this one that, so those of you that know anything about Greek, what's the guy's name? Archimedes. He was trying to figure out how to weigh the king's crown. Do you know this story? He was trying to figure out how to tell how heavy the king's crown was. He couldn't figure it out because it's an irregular shape. So he's struggling and struggling and struggling. How do I weigh this crown? How do I figure out its volume? How much gold is in it? Right? And he finally has a literally eureka moment, right? Because the mythology is that he said, Eureka! And does anybody know how he measured the weight of the crown? How did he do it? Water displacement, right. He figured out that if you drop any mass, any object of any shape in water and measure how much water it displaces, that's how you tell the volume of that object, right? Eureka moment. The best examples I could come up with in my own life about eureka moments are writing software code. So where'd Z go? They all went downstairs to make lunch, probably. Yes, that's where they went. So Z does software development now. These modern software developers, these kids, they develop at a level of abstraction which makes it very hard to make mistakes. But when I was writing software code, it was super easy to make mistakes. Right? You would get an assignment. It was write a program that does X, Y, and Z. And throughout the whole term, you'd have to add to this program and add to it. Okay, now you have to add a subroutine that checks for this. And now you have to add this, and now you have to add that. And inevitably, you would get to the point where you'd go, this thing won't compile. I don't know why it won't compile. Or it doesn't run, right? It does not run, or it doesn't produce the result. And I don't know, Ken and others that have done this for a living, there's a lot of you out there I know that have. Clement does this for a living. It never happens to him. Everything he's ever coded probably works perfectly. But back in the old days, I would spend hours and hours and hours just reading through each line. No, maybe I put a semicolon. No, I got that right. And maybe this and maybe that and maybe the other thing and maybe. And then inevitably it would be like you'd take a break and go to the school, to the cafeteria to grab some lunch or something like that, and somebody would say something to you and you go, I know what it is. Something that they said to you that had nothing to do with your software, it tipped you. I forgot to change this reference date in the source file, or, something like that, right? And then boom, the light would come on, you'd race back to your dorm room, change it, back then we were doing it on a mainframe, so you'd have to submit a batch and, all that stuff. But then it would come back and it would run, and it was like this eureka moment, like I figured it out, like inspiration broke through. And there's a little bit of an irony to me in the fact that epiphany is a Christian religious word. Because the first criticism of God ever leveled in history, well, actually, the second. First one was Satan in heaven, and I didn't hear those words. But the second one was Satan on earth talking to Eve, right? And the first criticism of God that Satan offered was, God doesn't really want you to know the difference between good and evil. That's why he told you not to eat from that tree. God is not a God of epiphanies. He's not a God of breakthroughs. He's not a God that wants you to understand things. As a matter of fact, he's trying to keep things away from you, right? And so Eve had to make this choice of, do I want to believe in a God of epiphanies who will lead me into all knowledge, or do I just want to take that in my own hands? And we know what she chose. Which is kind of remarkable. Satan's very, very, very clever because in the Bible, in Jeremiah 33, verse 3, it's one of my favorite verses. God says this. He says, call to me and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know. The God we serve is a God of epiphanies. He wants you to know everything. He wants you to be fully aware and have all the mental breakthroughs you can possibly have. But Satan, through history, has tried to make him the God that wants to keep you here, right? It's kind of like the Greek tradition. How many of you know who Prometheus is in Greek tradition? Okay, some of you do. Prometheus, so in Greek tradition, the gods are gods and the humans are humans. And the gods view humans as rascally rabbits, always up to no good, always messing things up. And so the gods in Greek tradition withheld everything they possibly could. They withheld all the blessings they possibly could from the humans because the humans would just mess it up, right? And so in the story of Prometheus, the Greek gods withhold fire from the humans. They say, nah, if we give it to the humans, that's just going to empower them. That's just going to make them think they're gods like us, and that just will not have a good outcome. And so in Greek tradition of gods withheld things from people. Prometheus was the human who stole fire from the gods and brought it down and gave it to the humans. But our God, the God we serve, says, no, I want you to know everything. If there's anything that is discernible and discoverable, I want to communicate it to you. And so I was thinking about this in terms of, so this is my third week on with Vacation Bible School in the middle. I was on the week before Vacation Bible School. We had the closing for Vacation Bible School last week, and now it's this week. And it's very unfortunate. I don't like to be this exposed. I don't like being up in front even 1 week in a row, much less 3. But I was talking to Barry, and I was saying, before Vacation Bible School started, the theme for Vacation Bible School was Shine Jesus Light. And it was all about light, because it was about space and darkness and light. And Barry said, well, why don't you speak the week before Vacation Bible School and kind of lead us into Vacation Bible School, introduce the theme. And I was telling Barry that week, I said, I have 2 ways I could go with this thing. I have a Bible story I'd really like to unpack that talks about light, and then I have something else I'd like to say. Could I do the week before Vacation Bible School and then the closing? And Barry said, no, I want to do the closing. I have something specific in mind, but you can do August 5th. So this is, for me, closing up Vacation Bible School, okay? So a little bit of a week late. And the story I wanted to unpack for you is one that I just kind of fell in love with during the Kids Bible Bowl when we were studying the book of John. And it's the story of when Jesus heals the man born blind. That's what that picture is up there. And this is a this has got one of the most famous like in church tradition, in the book of John, there's only 7 signs. And this is the 6th one. Lazarus being raised from the dead is the 7th. This is the 6th one. Jesus doesn't do many signs in the book of John. This is the 6th one. And it's so famous. It's recorded in art. Why don't you just hit the next, just click enter there. It's so famous that, like if you go and look for any old classic or even Gothic art about, Jesus healing the man born blind, it's everywhere. It's, religious painters and artists, this was a fascinating story. It makes very compelling drama. And so I want to unpack this a little bit today in the context of Shine Jesus Light. So you can pull up your Bibles, pull up Bible Gateway or whatever you use, and just set it on John chapter 9. And the interesting thing to me about John chapter 9, when we talk in the teen Sabbath school to the kids about the Bible and we try and unpack the Bible, we usually will read something and then we just ask a series of leading questions, right? And the leading questions are very simple. It's what does this seem to say to you? What is its point? What does it not say? Right? What is not said there that's implied, right? Or that might be important to the story. And so we try and get them to step back from the words for a minute and just think about it what's not there? What is there? What's kind of said but not entirely said. And this is one of those stories that is literally, I think, I could preach 10 sermons on this and they would all be different. Okay, so we're going to start at the top, and I'm going to kind of quickly run through this. This is a very dramatic passage. And the interesting thing to me about this passage is there's in my mind, there's like 4 different places that would make a good ending to this story. Like you come up to a spot in the passage and you go, oh, that would be a perfect place to end this. Oh, the story keeps going. Oh, no, that would be an even better place to end this. Oh, the story keeps going. And so the thing that I would ask the kids is, what does this, why does John put all this stuff in there? He could have ended this after verse 5 and it would have been a good story. He could have ended it in a couple of places, it would have been a good story. Why all the drama? What is going on here? So here we go at the beginning of chapter 9. It says, as he was passing by the way, the last verse of chapter 8, everybody tried to kill Jesus by throwing stones at him. He walked out, and immediately afterwards it says, as he was passing by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples questioned him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, Jesus. This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. We must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. And as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. That would be a great place to end the story. Really great place. You could preach a whole sermon on what is it that God is saying about human suffering here, right? There are books that have been written. Wait a minute, was God saying that he let this guy suffer his whole life just so Jesus could make a point? What does that say about God? There's this whole thing about human suffering and God. But in this passage, Jesus declares himself to be the light of the world, which is something that was said in John 1 when he was introduced, right? So Jesus is kind of knocking off the themes in John 1 and saying, yeah, here, I am the light of the world. So this would have been a great place to end, but Jesus didn't end. He goes on in verse 6 and he says, after he said these things, he spit on the ground, made some mud from saliva, and spread the mud on his eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left, washed, and came back seeing. That would be a great place to end. Right there would be an awesome place to end, right? Because you ask the kids to unpack this one, what do you think they immediately gravitate to? What's really weird in this section? That takes an awful lot of spit to make that amount of mud. That took more than a split second. Imagine that scene, right? But even more importantly, like the things that trigger me here are that Jesus sent him to the pool of Siloam, which the word Siloam means sent. That pool was named 2,000 years before this happened. Right? I mean, that pool had that name the whole time, but it was something that John felt like was really important to say, like there was a faith drama going on here, right? The kids also notice that, or I noticed, I'm like, well, why did Jesus bother with mud at all? Right? All he had to do was snap his fingers. He didn't even need to snap his fingers. He just needed to think, be healed, and he's healed. Why did he do this whole mud thing and sending him to the pool? Was that an act of faith? What was it? By the way, we talked in Next Gen Sabbath School this morning about how those who believe that the Bible endorses reincarnation refer to this verse. Because Jesus made a man out of mud, just like he did Adam. He made a new man. See? There you go. You knew the Bible mentioned it somewhere. But anyway, this would be a great place to end this thing. But then the story goes on. His neighbors and those who formerly had seen him as a beggar said, "Isn't this the man who sat begging?" Some said, "He is the one." No, others were saying, "But he looks like him." And he kept saying, "I'm the one." It'd be another good place to stop. The words that the beggar uses here to say, "I am the one," are the same words that Jesus uses when he says, "I am." It's that same expression, "I am." People are going, "You're not the same guy." Get the reincarnation theme? You're not the same guy. And he's like, "I am, I am, I am. I haven't changed. I am." Right? That's a huge, a whole sermon packed in there about identity in God and what was God trying to do and what was the faith component versus action component. A great place to end the story. But then the neighbors go on and they say, "Well, all right, if you're the one, if you haven't changed," it says, "Therefore they asked him, 'Then how were your eyes opened?' And he answered, 'The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and told me, "Go to Siloam and wash." So I went and washed. I received my sight." "Well, where is he?" they asked. "I don't know," he said. Another good place to end. You ask for the testimony. He gave the testimony. Great. Jesus is testified about, glorified. Wow, good place to end. Story doesn't end. We go on, verse 13. They brought the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees. And that, the day that Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes was a Sabbath. Of course it was. He made mud. It's on the Sabbath. I mean, Jesus was going to make a big story out of this. He opened his eyes. It was a Sabbath. And so again, the Pharisees asked him how he received his sight. He's going to testify again. "He put mud on my eyes," he told them. "I washed and I can see." Well, therefore, some of the Pharisees, now the dialogue shifts to Jesus. It's not about the man anymore. It's about Jesus. "Well, this man is not from God, for he doesn't keep the Sabbath." But others were saying, "Well, how can a sinful man perform such signs?" And there was division amongst them. Again, they asked the blind man, "What do you say about him since he opened your eyes?" "He's a prophet," he said. Again, great place to end. Testified. Jesus is a prophet. He did this. I'm the same guy. Miracle worked. Sight restored. Done. But the story goes on. Again, the Jews did not believe this about him, that he was blind and received sight, until they summoned the parents of the one who had received his sight. This is one of the best biblical stories about bad parenting there is. I mean, there's a lot of good stories about bad parenting. This to me is one of them. The Pharisees asked them, the parents, "Is this your son, the one you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" "Well, we know this is our son and that he was born blind," his parents answered. "But we don't know how he now sees, and we don't know who opened his eyes. Ask him." He is of age, he will speak for himself. His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, since the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him, capital H, as Messiah, he would be banned from the synagogue. That is why his parents said, he is of age, ask him. Yeah, I'm not taking any risks for my kid. I'm not going to testify about Jesus. Go ask him. So the second time, they summoned the man who had been blind and told him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. Jesus, they're referring to. The blind man, he answered, whether or not he's a sinner, I don't know. You can feel the frustration building in him. He's starting to get snippy. This is a biblical example of snippy. Okay, you're going to hear it. He says, I don't know. I already told you, and wait, where is he? Whether or not he's a sinner, I do not. One thing I do know, I was blind and now I can see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Here we go. This is the blind man. I already told you, he said, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? Oh, red flag to bulls. Red flag to bulls. They, the Pharisees, ridiculed him. You're that man's disciple, but we're Moses' disciples. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but this man, we don't know where he comes from. Here comes snippy blind man. This is an amazing thing, the man told them. You don't know where he is from, yet he opened my eyes. You know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. The blind man, the formerly blind man, is now enraged. He's angry with them. He sees the hypocrisy. He sees that they're just trying to find something to cling to. Maybe this is a different guy. Maybe he wasn't really blind before. Maybe, right? How can we poke a hole in this story? And the Pharisees said to the blind man in verse 34, you were born entirely in sin, they replied. And are you trying to teach us? Then they threw him out. This is the ideal place for this story to end, because it starts with a question of, was he born in sin? Why is he blind? And it ends with the Pharisees saying, you were born in sin. The people who were the guardians of the community closed the book on this thing and said, you were born in sin. Imagine if your whole life you had lived in a narrative, you're sitting on street corners begging, the entire narrative that's told about you is the poor guy, he was born in sin. That's the only thing anybody had ever told you. You get healed. You see. And the next thing they tell you is, didn't change the fact that you were born in sin. You're still a sinner. This would be a remarkably, it'd be if you're writing a novel, the man is cast out of community. He testified for Jesus 3 or 4 times. He got angry at people. He faced their anger and testified for Jesus to the point where they took the only thing away from him that he had left. His parents virtually disowned him, although I suspect they had a room at the house for him. But he lost his community. He walked away from everything for Jesus. It would be a fitting novel, but it's not the point of the story, and it's not the end of the story. this is. When Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out, he found him and asked, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" By the way, you may not have noticed, but each time the blind man testified about Jesus, he had a bigger vision of who Jesus was. The first time he testified about him, he said, it was a man named Jesus. The second time he testified about him, he's a prophet. The third time he testified him, he's like, he has to be a man sent from God, because God would not give him the ability to do this unless he was from God. And now Jesus is asking him, do you believe in the Son of Man? You would think the answer would be, what did I just do? I just told everybody that I believed in you. I just stood up to the Pharisees and told them that I believed in you. But he doesn't say that. His answer is, who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? And Jesus answered, you have seen him. Remarkable for a blind man. You have seen him. Right this second, right? This is present tense. You are seeing him. You have seen him. Because he hadn't seen Jesus before. He is the one, in fact, he is the one speaking with you. I believe, Lord, he said, and he worshiped him. That's the ending. That's the ending. To me, the remarkable thing about this story is that this blind man did everything a Christian is expected to do. He followed Jesus' commands in faith. He testified to everybody that would listen to him that Jesus was from God, that Jesus was holy, that Jesus was above. He did everything right. And at the end, he didn't know Jesus. Something else had to happen for him to actually know Jesus. This, to me, is the cautionary tale of life in a Christian church. It is a cautionary tale to me that I live in church, I raise my kids in church. If you look at what I do, what my kids do, you might be inclined to say, well, you're doing all the right things. And we might not know Jesus at all. We might never have seen the light. I called this sermon, All the Light We Cannot See, which is actually a recently written novel about basically about a blind girl in World War II. And the culmination of the novel is you realize that the novelist is saying that even if you're blind, and in fact, sometimes because you're blind, you can see things that, in a way that other people can't. That sometimes if you're raised with sight and you go through your whole life with sight, you think, I see. And in fact, you don't see what you need to see. You haven't had your epiphany. You haven't had your epiphany. You haven't figured out what that one punctuation mark is in your code that makes it not work. And Jesus, at the end of this story, I would love to imagine, it is not a true imagining, but I would love to imagine that moment when he revealed himself to the blind man had been thrown out of community. And Jesus, it says, Jesus found him. Jesus sought him out. He found him. And he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? There was this worship moment. There was this light moment where the man who was blind not only saw physically, but he saw the light that Jesus was. I would love to think, if I was writing the movie script for that moment, and I don't know how The Chosen has done it yet. You can tell me if they've done this story. But if I was writing the movie script for that moment, it would just be Jesus and that guy. That's it. The only people in that story. Nobody else around. The reality is probably the disciples were there. And as the book or this chapter finishes, we know there were a lot of other people there. Because it goes on, and Jesus says, I came into this world for judgment, in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. And some of the Pharisees who were with him, it wasn't a one-on-one moment. There was a crowd. It's not the way I'd write it. Like in the movie, when I write this, it'll just be Jesus and the blind guy. But Jesus was making a point, and the Pharisees who were with him heard these things, and they asked him, well, we aren't blind, are we? We aren't blind too, are we? They kind of heard what Jesus was saying, and they kind of heard that Jesus was implying that they were blind. And Jesus basically said, no, it's even worse than that. If you were blind, you wouldn't have sin. If you were blind, at least then there would be hope for you, because there would be a moment that I could reveal light to you, that I could give you sight, and you would understand that you had been blind the whole time. That, at least, would be a good outcome for you. But the reality is, but now that you say, we see, your sin remains. I mean, to Jesus, there's really only 3 states of existence with regard to light. You either see the light the way God intended it, the light of Jesus, the light of God. You don't see anything. Both those states, in the way Jesus describes it, both of those states are okay. The worst state you could possibly be in is the one in the middle. The one in the middle where you think you see, you proclaim to others that you see, but you're blind. You're blind to the things of God. You're blind to who Jesus is. You're blind to light. You see darkness as light. And in the book of John, chapter 1, when they're testifying about Jesus coming, they say he was the light, but people didn't recognize him. Impossible to believe, but people can look directly at the light of God and think it's darkness. And people can be in darkness with the light of God all around them, all the light we cannot see. They can be in darkness with all the light that's around them and think they see everything just fine. My challenge to you, to myself, out of this passage, and again, we could preach 10 sermons out of this passage, but my challenge to you is this. We come here every week. We do the right things. We teach. We disciple. All these things. Have you met Jesus? And do you believe in him? That's a personal challenge that only I can answer for me. I can't answer it for anybody else. Only you can answer it for you. But I ask that you at least consider, have you met Jesus? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're glad that you speak to us sometimes in the Bible in very simple language, light and dark and food and water and just things that are very simple for us to understand, because we are complicated creatures. We like to make things far more interesting and complicated than we are. We like to understand all the nuances of things and be able to tell the stories right and to know the truths. But Lord, thank you for reminding us in this passage and others that we can know all things and not know you. We ask this morning that I ask that we all, myself included, be committed to knowing you, that we can be like that blind man, that when he knelt before you and saw you for the first time for who you are, said, I believe, and worshiped you. I ask for this blessing for all of us this morning. I know that you want to give it. Amen.